Brian, this is the fifth of 8 divisions in the NFL. This week, we're going to be talking about the AFC South. Maybe not the best division in football, certainly not the most exciting, especially coming off of the division we talked about last week. But I think there's still some exciting players within this division to talk about. And first up, as far as teams goes, are the Tennessee Titans. So what did you think about the Titans last year?
Uh, Not overly impressed, honestly. It kind of is like watching Cleveland or watching, uh, unfortunately, the Raiders last year. It was kind of a disaster year for all three of those teams. 3-14 is just not, you're not playing good football. I know you've got some notes here, so I don't want to spoil anything in your notes, but they were, in my mind, they just weren't overall, they were not good. Now, I do know they have some good players. They tried hard, but in the NFL, we know they don't give participation trophies, nor should they ever in any league. But that's a conversation for a different day.
Well, I mean,
So
they had the number one pick in the draft for a reason, and we'll get into the player that they used that pick on. But going back to 2024, I think the biggest issue with them was their offense. They ranked 26. They only mustered 304 yards per game. I think a lot of that kind of scaled back to the quarterback position. Will Levis did not take the step forward that a lot of people hoped or predicted he would. The offense just did not take any step forward. He was in and out of the lineup. I think a lot of times he had not highlights but lowlights. He had funny freeze frame photos that he was known for on social media. That was his big contribution to the Titans last year. And then on top of that, Mason Rudolph coming in, so on and so forth. The offense was not good, and it shows in that 26 ranking. It would almost be interesting to see the teams that finished behind them, that 27th through 32, to figure out what were they doing wrong that the Titans finished with more yards per game than they did. The one thing that did work in their favor, maybe, was their defense. They were second in defense as far as yards per game allowed, with only 311. The only team that was better than them in that metric was the Philadelphia Eagles. But I think if you dig a little bit deeper into that, the Titans gave up 55 touchdowns over the course of the regular season. Philadelphia only gave up 33. So, I mean, that is a huge disparity as far as scoring defense goes versus the yards allowed. So the Titans have a lot of work to do this offseason to get themselves away from being a 3-14 team. And I'll go ahead and spoil the video just a little bit, as we sometimes do. I don't think that they did enough, but I guess we can get into some of their moves and talk about it.
yeah, I'd say let's get into it because I'm like you. I don't think they did enough. So I kind of feel like we're in for more of the same. And sorry, Tennessee fans. I actually want to be a Tennessee fan, and Jacksonville too. I know we're gonna get into that video probably tomorrow or the next day, but you know, it's kind of the same thing. You want to be a Jacksonville fan, and I know in the earlier video I said I was a new Raiders fan, but I can't find myself pulling for Jacksonville or the Titans, even though they're close to home and they're AFC teams versus my Falcons being the NFC. I can't fall in love with either one of these teams because it's just not great football.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the thing is we want an exciting brand of football, and the Titans just haven't really been able to provide that for a while. But looking at some of the players that left, key departures, the biggest one's going to be Harold Landry. He has been a productive edge rusher. He now finds himself playing with the New England Patriots. I think that absence is going to be sorely missed more than any of them. Chidobe Awuzie, a corner we saw in the Baltimore Ravens video, joined that talented secondary along with Jairi Alexander and a lot of their draft picks. We've talked about them and how good we think they're going to be this year. And then Kenneth Murray, a linebacker that got traded to Dallas. All three of these pieces were, I think, key contributors on that defense that had some good and some bad numbers, and yet they're off. They're playing in other teams now. So it's kind of one of those things where I don't want to say that Tennessee's defense is going to regress substantially, but when you lose talent like Harold Landry especially, you're going to have some issues in stopping other teams.
Yeah, it's almost like them losing their running back to the Ravens, and the Ravens are great, and they're still not great.
So moving forward to some of their signings in the new Tennessee Titans, big money was spent on a new left tackle in Dan Moore, 4 years, $82 million. They also brought in a new guard by the name of Kevin Zeitler. He only gets a 1 year deal, 9 million, but I expect him to start this year. Cody Barton got 3 years, $21 million coming in at the linebacker position. Talked about Kenneth Murray being traded away. Cody Barton gets to come in, take some snaps at linebackers. And then they also brought in a pair of receivers in Tyler Lockett and Van Jefferson. This receiver room, I think, is going to have the most change from any position on the depth chart. I think we're going to talk more about the wide receivers than anything else in this video. But just as far as their free agency, wanted to get your thoughts. How do you think they did as far as plugging holes on this roster?
Yeah, I definitely, usually when you see a team that's not real good offensively, and obviously they weren't being at 26, you know, I tend to go to, okay, you have issues at the line, you know, area, whether it's a guard position, a tackle, whatever, you've got holes that you need to fill. So it looks like they did that potentially. Um, I kind of hope that's where which way they were going. We're gonna get into their quarterback here in a minute with the draft, but you know, again, those young kids are gonna need protecting, and if you don't bring in veteran linemen, proven entities, you can't do that. And like I said, if he's gonna get Cam Ward, if he's gonna get the same production level that last year line gave, you know, I'm sorry. He's I don't care how good he is out of college, he's not gonna do good in the NFL.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think when we move into the draft and talking about what they did here, yeah, they made some draft picks on defense, but I really want to focus on what they did on the offensive side of the ball because that's where they really needed to improve the most, obviously. So, first round, first overall pick, as expected, Cam Ward, quarterback from Miami. This is a quarterback that we've talked about a lot. We've seen him play a lot of games. We've seen the way he can distribute the ball around an offense. He's not as athletic as like a Jaden Daniels or a similar quarterback to that style. But I think he's somebody that can be a productive pro quarterback if you surround him with enough talent. So you kind of look at their trio of fourth round picks, two wide receivers and a tight end. I talked a moment ago, Tyler Lockett, Van Jefferson, these are receivers that have been around the league for a long time. They know how to win, they know how to run routes. That's going to be valuable not only for Cam Ward, but also the other young pass catchers that they have brought in. Look at DK, a wide receiver from Florida. He's kind of a slot guy. And then Alec Eomenor, who is a wide receiver from Stanford, a lot more of a bigger bodied guy. This is an inside outside kind of pairing there. And then sandwiched between them was Gunnar Helmy, tied in from Texas. So you look at what Chigakonkwo does for that offense, bringing in Gunnar Helm to learn behind him. He's somebody that can be a receiving threat. He can also block decently well. It just gives them more weapons that needed to be injected into an offense that just didn't have any last year. Yes, I think that the pairing of Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears at the running back position can be a productive one with better blocking, and we talked about those. But this draft had a very clear vision. It was get our quarterback of the future and give him as many weapons as possible. And this isn't necessarily a draft pick, but another thing they did was they brought in Xavier Restrepo as an undrafted free agent. That was Cam Ward's number one target at Miami. He went undrafted after a terrible pro day, a very slow 40 time. They bring him in again. So in this draft, this class alone, you're looking at three wide receivers and a tight end that they brought in. I think they also brought in another running back named Caleb Mullings. And so they are stocking this offense to try to give Cam Ward enough tools to, it's basically let the best man go out, win the job, and try to field a productive offense. But I'm curious to know what you think as far as how successful they might have been in that juncture.
Well, I think they brought in weapons. The problem is you've got a bunch of young guys, going, basically you're feeding them to the wolves in the NFL. So, I almost look to see this team about like Chicago was last year. Uh, you know, you've kind of got a similar type quarterback. You know, I don't know that they've done enough for the offensive line to help that. Um, you've got decent weapons, as far as wide receivers, and hopefully this tight end can make a difference. But I think you're going to run into the same problem that Chicago did last year, the 2024 year, in 2025 with Tennessee. And I still think you're one more draft. You're several pickups away from having a decent season. I don't know that I see them performing as well as they could with a year's worth of experience under their belt.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the big thing is seeing who steps up because Tyler Lockett can teach DK a lot about how to win in the slot. He can teach all the receivers in that room how to be productive route runners. Calvin Ridley is still in his prime. I think he's 29 years old, which might sound a little bit old, but he was older coming into the league and hasn't played as much football as what you'd expect from a 29-year-old because of some off the field stuff. But I think when you look at the trio of Calvin Ridley, Van Jefferson, and Tyler Lockett, those could be your day one starting wide receivers.
Sure.
And then Chigakonko starting at tight end. So that means you've got DK, you've got Ao Manor, you've got Restrepo and Gunnar Helm. They are all backing up these veterans that are now going to have to be on their top game to try to unseat a lot of these veterans. They're going to have to earn their playing time, which I think is going to help them grow and progress so that by the time we get to the 2026 season, they're ready to take the reins and actually be a focal point of the offense because there is a lot of production that's going to be up for grabs, especially if you look at, we don't know how much football Calvin Ridley has left, but this could very easily be the last year for Tyler Lockett. Who knows how much longer Van Jefferson can stick in the league? He's never been a great receiver anyway, but it's just somebody that can take those veteran snaps. He's got a lot of experience under his belt, if not production. And that's something that the Titans really need in that room because you look at what they had last year, and it just wasn't a productive wide receiver core, even with Calvin Ridley. So, that being said, kind of looking at their strengths and concerns, I think their biggest strength is going to continue to be that defense. I think if they can cut down on the amount of points that they give up on a week, then they are going to be more productive in games. We've talked about that with a couple of other teams where if your defense is good enough, you don't have to have a top 5 offense to win games. You can have a top 20, top 16 level offense, but if you pair that with a top 10 defense, you can win games because they're going to give you a lot of opportunities even without a productive offense. Unfortunately, as far as their biggest concern is, I just don't know if there's enough talent ready to produce, going back to what we talked about around Cam Ward to take that big step forward. You need the offensive line to play better. You need these receivers to be productive, both the veterans and the rookies. And you need Cam Ward to come in and be as great as what we've seen other recent rookie quarterbacks to be. And I'm just not sure that he's ready to be that guy. Yes, he was the number one option as far as quarterbacks goes in this draft class. But if you take J.J. McCarthy from last year's class and you drop him in this class, guess what? Cam Ward isn't the number one overall pick. In fact, I think you could put any of those first-round quarterbacks from last year, whether it be Bo Nix, Michael Penix Jr., or certainly any of the big three between Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, any of those guys from the first round of last year's draft would have been the number one pick over Cam Ward this year. It doesn't mean that I'm not a believer in him. I just don't think that he is ready to play winning football on his own. He is not going to be Superman. He's not going to be rookie year Cam Newton that just puts a whole team on his back and carries them. So for that, you look at as far as record predictions goes, they were 3-14 last year. I've got them improving ever so slightly to 4-13 this year and still finishing fourth in a not great division, which I think is just a testament to the fact that they're not going to be ready to compete this year.
Yeah, I'm there with you. If they win 3 games, I'll be kind of where I'm thinking they're going to be. If they win 5 games, I'll be impressed. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I've got them finishing fourth. I don't think they're going to be very good this year. Like I said, I still think they're a year away because of that experience and just that unproven. I'm like you with the quarterback. If you put him in last year's draft class, he's not. No, he's lucky if he's second round or maybe even third round pick. So I they could prove us wrong. I just don't see it happening. Um, with all that being said, fantasy football, where you got who you got?
No, nobody really. I mean, if obviously, there are going to be players from this team that are drafted. Tony Pollard is going to be drafted. He's going to fill a role on a fantasy football team. Calvin Ridley will fill a role on a football team. I've got a dynasty league that just drafted the startup earlier this, and I took Calvin Ridley in a later round because I know he can be a veteran contributor. I'm only looking to compete this year. He's somebody that can still score points. If Cam Ward is better than I think he's going to be this year, and this offense does better, he's the number one target for that offense. But when you're looking at redraft leagues, I don't want to have to rely on Cam Ward being able to supply Calvin Ridley with enough targets, enough catchable balls, and certainly enough touchdowns to want to rely on him starting every week. And I think a lot of times when we talk about who we want from each team for fantasy football, we're talking about who we want to put in our starting lineup. Obviously, there are going to be a lot more players drafted from each team than what we mentioned in these videos. But if it's not Calvin Ridley, I don't think I'm touching this team. I'm not a big fan of Tony Pollard or Tajay Spears. I think they take too much away from one another. And as far as these receivers, past Calvin Ridley, the tight ends, it's all a crapshoot anyway as far as who do we think could step up and become Cam Ward's favorite targets if it's not Calvin Ridley, because he's a new quarterback. He's a rookie. We haven't seen it. We don't know what his tendencies are going to be. We don't know what coaching is going to do when they get a hold of him, what the scheme is going to look like. And these coaches could all be coaching for their jobs. I mean, if we have a 4-13 year after a 3-14 year, I don't know that Cam Ward is going to be enough to save Callahan's job. So, like I said, as far as the Titans goes, I'm probably staying away this year just because bad football does not lead to fantasy points, and that's what we're after, scoring the most points on a week-to-week basis. And I'm just not sure the Titans can provide that for me.
Yep, 100%. I'm not taking anybody. Like you said, maybe Calvin Ridley later, much later rounds, but I just don't have a lot of confidence in Ward getting him the football on a somewhat regular basis. I would soon not take any of them. I know sometimes you get put in a position where you have to take them, especially in the redrafts. But right now, as it stands, I would not be picking them up on draft day.
Yeah, absolutely. And that being said, Titans, not a very good football team in 2024. Unfortunately, I feel like we're in agreement that they're not going to be a very good team in 2025. But if any of you watching this video disagree and you think that we are too down on the Titans and you want to argue with us in the comment section, I welcome that discussion. I would love to know why I'm wrong, and maybe you see something that I don't. I know homerism is alive and well in a lot of these fan bases, and we're certainly guilty of it at times as well. I just don't see it with this team, but I would love to know why I'm wrong. So comment down below if you haven't already. Some people will pause a video and go ahead and jump in the comments and tell us why we're wrong with timestamps, and I love to see that too. But if you're still watching at this point, if you haven't sounded off, if you want to write me off as an idiot, that's okay too. But I'd love to know why you think that the Titans are going to be better than a 4-win team in 2025.
100%. All right, guys, this is going to do it for the Tennessee Titans. Sorry we didn't have better news for you. Hopefully you're a Jacksonville fan and you'll tune into the next video and maybe it'll be a little bit better. Maybe it won't. Just tune in and find out.